Rylan had survived crash landings before, but none where the ground groaned back at him. The violet soil under his boots shifted like it disliked being stepped on, and he muttered an apology in case the planet held grudges. His shuttle lay behind him in three sad pieces that had once dreamed of being a single proud machine, and he was elbow-deep in the least damaged fragment, cursing at wires that sparked like offended snakes. He was halfway through an argument with a stubborn circuit when a distant scream tore through the forest. It was sharp, desperate, and definitely not human, which did not make him feel any better. He hesitated for a single responsible second, then grabbed his plasma cutter and sprinted toward the sound, tripping twice because the plant life did not understand the concept of staying out of the way. The forest opened into a clearing bathed in blue glow from towering fungi, and there she was, a long-eared alien woman cornered by a hulking creature with 6 legs, each thicker than Rylan's torso. The beast had too many teeth and not enough personality to justify keeping any of them. It lunged at her, and she dodged with a mix of grace and frustration, shouting something in a language that sounded beautifully furious. Rylan didn't think. He simply yelled something unintelligible, which startled the creature exactly enough for him to hurl himself between them with the least tactical scream imaginable. His plasma cutter sparked, coughed, and produced one unimpressed flicker of light before going silent. The creature blinked at the absurdity of it, and that moment of confusion saved his life. The alien woman seized a fallen branch, which somehow hummed with energy, and slashed the beast across its snout. It roared, stumbled back, and fled into the shadows with the humiliated gait of something that had just been beaten by a stick and a malfunctioning tool. Rylan exhaled so hard his knees nearly gave out, and the woman spun toward him, long ears twitching like she was recalibrating her opinion of him. She spoke sharply, and though he couldn't understand her, the tone translated universally into, "What were you thinking?" He held up the useless cutter, shrugged, and said he'd been improvising. She groaned, pinched the bridge of her nose, and muttered a string of syllables that likely meant he was an idiot but a temporarily convenient one. When she switched to a translator crystal around her neck, her voice became smooth and unexpectedly warm. She introduced herself as Lysera and explained that the creature had been hunting her for hours. Rylan introduced himself and admitted he'd been hunting a working power cell with similar enthusiasm. She eyed his cutter with open pity. He told her it usually behaved better, and she asked if better meant slightly less embarrassing. They stared at each other, both trying not to laugh, and failed at exactly the same moment. Lysera gestured toward the dense forest and said her settlement lay beyond the mountains, a 2-day journey if nothing tried to eat them. Rylan said something always tried to eat him lately, but he'd walk with her if she could help him find a power source along the way. She agreed, though her expression suggested she'd regret it before nightfall. They set off together, Rylan pushing branches aside while Lysera moved with an elegant ease he envied. Her long ears swiveled constantly, catching sounds long before he heard them. Twice she shoved him aside before a vine snapped at his ankle, or a glowing insect buzzed by with clear homicidal intent. Each time, she muttered that humans were unnecessarily fragile. Each time, he thanked her and tried not to prove her right immediately after. They reached a river of shimmering teal water that gurgled like it had secrets. Lysera knelt to collect some in a small container, warning Rylan not to drink it unless he wanted hallucinations involving dancing meteorites. He backed away quickly, tripped on a root, and pretended he'd meant to sit down. She laughed, ears tilting back in clear amusement, and told him he moved like someone whose coordination had been borrowed and not returned in full. He said she had very judgmental ears, and she replied that they were simply honest. As they continued, Rylan began to notice details he hadn't before, how her long ears flicked up when she was curious, down when she was irritated, and slightly forward when she was amused by him. He also noticed she walked slightly ahead but never so far that he couldn't reach her with one step. When a sudden gust rustled the foliage and a distant roar echoed through the trees, Lysera stiffened. That was the creature, she whispered. It wasn't giving up. It had caught her scent again. Ryland said he hoped her people had a really great security system. She replied that they did, but none of them would believe she'd required rescuing by a human with a suicidal plasma cutter. He promised not to brag. She promised to deny ever needing him. They kept walking, the forest watching them with glowing eyes and restless whispers, and Ryland felt that strange, stubborn spark deep inside him, the one that insisted he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was stepping into something larger, stranger, and far more dangerous. Beside him, Lysera walked with quiet determination, long ears alert, and for the first time since the crash, he felt less alone. Rylan woke to the sound of something chewing very close to his head, which was never a good way to start a morning. He sat up so fast he nearly head-butted Lysera, who calmly pointed to a small creature gnawing on his boot. It looked like a rabbit designed by someone who disliked rabbits, spiky fur, glowing eyes, and an attitude that suggested it had already judged Rylan and found him lacking. Lysera tapped it lightly with the end of her staff, and it scampered off, clearly offended. Rylan muttered that even the wildlife here mocked him in his sleep. Lysera's ears flicked in amusement as she handed him a ration bar she claimed was edible. He took a bite and immediately questioned her definition of edible. She told him it was packed with nutrients. He told her it tasted like compressed regret. They continued through the dense forest, where the air hummed with unseen energy. Massive trees twisted overhead like cosmic antennae, their leaves shimmering as if reflecting starlight instead of sunlight. Lysera explained that the entire forest reacted to emotion, which made Rylan deeply concerned for the trees around him. When he stepped on a glowing vine and it slapped his ankle, he yelped and accused the foliage of holding grudges. Lysera laughed, her ears tilting forward in amusement, and said the plants simply responded to incompetence. He argued that they'd be very busy then. As they walked, she taught him bits of her language, though most of what he learned were words she muttered whenever he tripped. In return, he attempted to explain sarcasm, which she took as a personal challenge. When he told her that humans occasionally used sarcasm to hide affection, she raised one eyebrow and asked if that meant he secretly adored every obstacle he insulted. He said absolutely not, especially not the vine that tried to assassinate him. She said the vine might be flattered. Later, as they crossed a valley carpeted with bioluminescent moss, a pack of glow wolves emerged from the mist. Their bodies flickered like constellations caught in motion, and they circled with cautious curiosity rather than hunger. Lysera knelt, sheathing her staff, and made a soft clicking sound. The wolves responded with shimmering ripples through their fur, and after a moment they retreated back into the fog. Rylan let out a breath he wasn't aware he'd been holding. Lysera smiled slightly and said they judged him harmless. He claimed he could have fought one if necessary. She raised a skeptical brow and said perhaps a very old one, missing several teeth, and asleep. By midday, they reached a metallic ravine where ancient alien scaffolding jutted out of the stone like the ribs of a forgotten machine. Rylan paused, excited, because even ruins on this moon looked like they belonged in a museum he wasn't wealthy enough to enter. Lysera explained the structures were remnants of an ancient traveler's network, portals once capable of linking distant corners of the galaxy. Now the frames hummed faintly, sparking with traces of energy but refusing to activate. Rylan examined one and declared he might be able to coax some power from it for his shuttle systems. Lysera looked unconvinced but allowed him to try. He dug through wiring with unearned confidence until a sudden jolt blasted him backward into a pile of soft moss. Lysera rushed over, ears flared with alarm, only to find him staring at the sky and mumbling that he saw his ancestors waving disapprovingly. She helped him sit up, half worried, half exasperated, and told him not to touch anything older than her grandmother. He agreed but insisted the moss had cushioned him nicely. She informed him that moss was carnivorous. He leaped up immediately. They continued onward, the forest gradually giving way to crystalline terrain where the ground sparkled like frozen lightning. Lysira's pace quickened. She said they were getting closer to the mountains that hid her settlement. Ryland felt a flicker of hope that he might actually leave this moon alive, but that hope dimmed when a distant roar echoed across the valley. Lysira froze, her ears angling sharply toward the sound. The creature had found their trail again. Ryland suggested they keep moving quietly. Lysira said the creature wouldn't be fooled by silence. It tracked energy signatures, heartbeats, fear. Ryland said he could at least try to feel less afraid. She replied that his face was already betraying him. He claimed his face always did that. She believed him. As dusk settled, they reached a narrow canyon illuminated by glowing stones embedded in the walls. Shadows danced along the ridges, and every sound echoed unnervingly. Ryland tried to lighten the mood by telling a joke about a malfunctioning robot bartender, and though Lysira didn't fully understand it, she laughed anyway. For a moment, the chase, the danger, the unknown, all of it faded beneath the warmth of shared laughter. But when the ground trembled and an enormous silhouette appeared at the canyon's far end, Lysira grabbed his arm. The creature stepped from the shadows, larger than before, as if the darkness had fattened it with new strength. Its eyes locked on them with predatory hunger. Ryland whispered that it seemed upset. Lysira whispered that it seemed very determined. Together they backed away, hearts pounding in unsteady unison, knowing the fragile thread of survival between them was about to be tested harder than ever before. The creature advanced with the confident stride of something that had already decided they would make a decent meal. Ryland grabbed Lysira's hand and pulled her down a narrow side passage between jagged rocks, the two of them squeezing through while the monster roared behind them, frustrated that its dinner came with inconvenient geometry. They emerged onto a ledge overlooking an ancient outpost embedded into the mountainside, its metal doors half buried under glowing vines. Ryland said he hoped the outpost still functioned. Lysira said she hoped Ryland still functioned. He promised nothing. They scrambled inside just as the creature wedged its massive head into the entrance, its teeth scraping sparks off the metal. Ryland slammed his shoulder into the door controls, and by some miracle or pity from the universe, the doors groaned shut. The creature's claws screeched across the barrier, but it couldn't push through. For the moment, they were safe. Ryland bent over, hands on knees, trying to breathe while Lysira inspected the dusty consoles with cautious hope. The outpost hummed faintly, as if waking from a long sleep. Ryland checked a panel and found a power junction that looked surprisingly intact. He told Lysira they might be able to use it to activate something useful. She asked if he meant something useful in the traditional sense or in the sense that often resulted in explosions. He replied that he wasn't ruling anything out. Still, together they worked quickly, her steady hands guiding his less steady ones. The facility's lights flickered to life, revealing a central chamber filled with dormant machinery and a massive cylindrical device that towered over them like a forgotten titan. Lysira explained it was an old defensive resonator, capable of emitting shockwaves strong enough to repel large predators. Ryland said that sounded perfect. Lysira said it also required precise calibration to avoid vaporizing everything within a kilometer. Ryland asked her to handle the calibration. She agreed immediately. While Lysira worked on the resonator, Ryland searched for components to boost the power grid. He found a crate full of crystalline fuel cells and nearly cheered. When he opened one, it burst into harmless glittering mist, covering him head to toe in shimmering dust. Lysira turned, saw him sparkling like an enthusiastic festival decoration, and asked if this was a human mating display. He sputtered a denial while she laughed so hard her ears folded back. Outside, the creature had begun slamming its full weight against the outpost doors. Metal warped. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lysira intensified her efforts, the resonator humming louder, its core glowing like a captured star. Rylan fed power into the system, hoping he wasn't about to short-circuit the entire mountain. The resonator vibrated, the air trembling with rising energy. Lysera called for him to stand back. Rylan stood behind her but peeked over her shoulder anyway, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. The doors buckled inward. The creature surged into the room, its roar shaking the floor. Lysera slammed her hand onto the resonator control. A pulse of radiant force erupted outward in a cascading wave that engulfed the creature. It froze, suspended for a heartbeat in shimmering light, then was blasted backward out of the outpost with a force so great the mountains themselves seemed to echo their approval. Silence fell, startled and absolute, broken only by Ryland's shaky exhale. Lysera steadied herself on the console, her long ears still trembling from the surge, and gave him a weary smile. The threat gone, they took time to stabilize the systems and rest. Ryland finally managed to configure the outpost's power cells to charge a portable unit strong enough to restart his shuttle. Lysera watched him work, noticing the confidence in his movements, the calmer breath, the way he no longer flinched at every sound. She told him he'd changed. He said surviving with her required rapid evolution. She said he'd done well for someone who nearly lost a fight with Moss. He accepted the compliment. When they finally stepped out into the open air, dawn painted the sky in copper and violet, the forest rustling in a way that almost felt approving. They walked together toward her settlement, where tall crystalline towers rose from the cliffs like luminous spires. Her people greeted them with astonishment, especially when Lysera announced he had saved her, not once, but repeatedly. Ryland tried to correct the record, but Lysera spoke over him with a dignity that made the truth irrelevant. They stood at the gate as the village welcomed her home. Ryland felt a tug inside him, the lingering ache of goodbyes he wasn't ready to make. Lysera stepped closer, her long ears angled gently toward him, a gesture he'd come to recognize as sincerity. She thanked him not for saving her, but for walking beside her even when he was terrified, which, she pointed out, was most of the time. He laughed and said fear had been a great motivator. She asked if he would return someday. He said he would, if she didn't mind guiding him again through the forest that kept trying to murder him. She said the forest would simply have to get in line. When Ryland boarded the repaired shuttle, he glanced back one last time. Lysera stood with Dawn at her back, a steady figure in a world that had tried to break them. He realized he felt braver now, not because the dangers had lessened, but because he had learned what it meant to face them with someone he trusted. As the shuttle rose into the sky, he carried with him the memory of a long-eared alien woman who had changed him more than any world he had ever explored.